The 2 puncture wounds seemed enormous and lined with pain, and now he bent over my helpless head and, taking his right hand off me, bit his own wrist. The blood flowed down upon my shirt and coat, and he watched with a narrow, gleaming eye. It seemed an eternity that he watched it, and that the shimmer of light now hung behind his head like the backdrop of aspiration. I think that I knew what he meant to do even before he did it, and I was waiting in my helplessness if I had been waiting for years. He pressed his bleeding wrist to my mouth and said firmly, a little impatiently, "Louise, drink." And I did. "Steady, Louise," he said. "Hurry," he whispered to me a number of times. I drank, sucking the blood out of his punctures, experiencing for the first time since infancy the special pleasure of sucking nourishment. The body focused with the mind upon one vital source. Then something happened. The vampire sat back up, a slight frown on his face. "How pathetic it is to describe these things which can't truly be described," he said, his low voice almost to a whisper. The boy sat, frozen. I saw nothing but the light then as I drew blood, and then the next thing was sound. A dull roar at first, and then a pounding like the pounding of a drum, growing louder and louder as some enormous creature was coming up to slowly through the dark, an alien force pounding as he came, a huge drum. And then there came the pounding of another drum, as if another giant was coming yards behind him, and each giant, intent on his own drum, gave no notice to the rhythm of the other. The sound grew louder and louder until it seemed to fill not just my hearing but all my senses. The throbbing in my lips and fingers, and the flesh in my temples and my veins, above all my veins. Drum, and then the other drum, and then Lestat pulled his wrist free, and I opened my eyes. And I checked myself in the motion of reaching for his whip, grabbing it, forcing it back into my mouth at all costs. I checked myself because I realized the drum was my heart, and the second drum had been his. The vampire sighed. "Do you understand?" The boy began to speak, and then he shook his head. "No, I do," he said. Of course," said the vampire, looking away. Wait, said the boy in a welter of excitement. "The tape is almost gone. I have to turn it over." The vampire watched patiently as he changed it. "What happened then?" the boy asked. His face was moist, and he wiped it hurriedly with his handkerchief. "I saw as a vampire," said the vampire, his voice now slightly detached. I seemed almost distracted, and then he drew himself up again. Lestat was standing against the foot of the stairs, and I saw him as I could have not possibly seen him before. He had seemed white to me before, starkly white, so in the night he was almost luminous, and now I saw him filled with his own life and his own blood. He was radiant, not luminous, and then I saw not only that Lestat had changed, but all things had changed. It was as if I had just been able to see colors and shapes for the first time. I was so enthralled with this buttons on Lestat's black coat that I looked at nothing else for a long time. Then Lestat began to laugh, and I heard his laughter I had never heard before. His heart I still heard like the beating of a drum, and now came his metallic laughter. It was confusing, each sound running into the next like the mingling vibrations of bells, until I learned to separate the sounds, and they were overlapped, each soft but distinctive, increasing with discrete peals of laughter. The vampire smiled with delight. Peals of bells. "Stop looking at my buttons," Lestat said. "Go out there into the trees, rid yourself of all the human waste in your body, and don't fall so madly in love with the night that you lose your waste." That, of course, was a wise command. When I saw the moon on the flagstones, I became so enamored by it that I must have spent an hour there. I passed my brother's oratory without so much of a thought of him, and standing among the cottonwoods and oaks, I heard the night as if it were a chorus of whispering women, all beckoning to me, to their breasts. And as for my body, it was not yet totally converted, and as soon as I became at least accustomed to the sounds and sights, it began to ache. All of my human fluids were being forced out of me. I was dying as a human, yet completely alive as a vampire. With my awakened sentence, I had to preside over my death of my body with a certain discomfort, and then, finally, fear. I ran back up the stairs to the parlor, where Lestat was already at work on the plantation papers, going over expenses and profits from last year. "You're a rich man," he said to me when I came in. "Something's happening to me," I shouted. "You're dying, that's all. Don't be a fool. Don't you have any oil lamps? All this money and you can't afford whale oil except for the lantern? Bring me that lantern." "Dying!" I shouted. "Dying!" It happens to everyone, he persisted, refusing to help me. As I look back on this, I still despise him for it, not because I was afraid, but because he might have drawn my attention to these changes with reverence. He might have called me and told me I might watch my death with the same fascination with which I had watched and felt the night, but he didn't. Lestat was never the vampire I am, not at all. The vampire did not say this boastfully. He said that if it would have been as if he would truly have had it otherwise. Lors, he sighed. I was dying fast, which meant my capacity for fear was diminishing as rapidly. I simply regret that I was not more attentive to the process. Lestat was being a perfect idiot. Oh, for the love of hell, he began shouting. Do you realize I'm making no provision for you? What a fool I am, I was tempted to say. Yes, you are. But I didn't. You have to go to bed down with me this morning. I haven't prepared you a coffin. The vampire laughed. The coffin struck a chord of terror in me, and I think it absorbed all capacity for terror I had left. That end came in my only mild alarm at having to share a coffin with Lestat. He was in his father's bedroom, telling the old man goodbye, and he returned in the morning. Well, where do you go? Why do you must live by such a schedule? The old man demanded. Lestat became impatient. Before this, he had always been gracious to the old man, almost to the point of a sickening one, but now he became a boy. I take care of you, don't I? I put a better roof on your head than you've ever put over mine. If you want to sleep all day and drink all night, I'll do it. Thank you. Damn you. The old man started to whine. Only my peculiar state of emotions and the most unusual feeling of exhaustion kept me from disapproving. I was watching this scene through the open door, enthralled with the colors of the counterpane and the positive right of color in the old man's face. His blue veins pulsed through beneath his pink and grayish flesh. I found even the yellow of his teeth appealing to me, and I almost became hypnotized by the quivering of his lip. Such a son, he said, never suspecting, of course, the true nature of his son. All right, then go. I know you keep a woman somewhere. You have to go to her as soon as her husband leaves in the morning. Give me my rosary. What happened to my rosary? Lestat said something blasphemous and gave him the rosary. But, the boy stated, yes, the vampire? I'm afraid I don't allow you to ask such questions. I was going to ask. Rosaries have crosses on them, don't they? Oh, the rumor about crosses. The vampire laughed. You referred to our being afraid of crosses? Unable to look at him, I thought, said the boy. Nonsense, my friend, sheer nonsense. I can look on anything I like, and I rather like looking at crucifixes in particular. And what about the rumor about keyholes, that you can become a stream and go through them? I wish I could, laughed the vampire. How positively delightful. I should like to pass through all manner of different keyholes and feed the tickle of their particular shapes. No, he shook his head. That is how would you see it today. Bullshit. The boy laughed despite himself. Then his face grew serious. Sorry, I wasn't expecting that to be funny. You mustn't be so shy of me, the vampire said. What is it? A story about stakes to the heart, said the boy, his cheeks coloring slightly. The same, said the vampire. Bullshit, he said carefully, articulating both syllables so that the boy smiled. No magic powers whatsoever. Why don't you smoke one of your cigarettes? I see that you have them in your shirt pocket. Oh, thank you, the boy said, as if he were a marvelous suggestion. Once he had the cigarettes to his lips, his hands were trembling so badly he mangled the first fragile book match. Allow me, said the vampire, and taking the book, he quickly lit one of the matches to the boy's cigarette. The boy inhaled, his eyes on the vampire's fingers. Now the vampire withdrew across the table with the soft rustling of garments. There's an ashtray on the basin, he said, and the boy moved nervously to get it. He stared at the few butts in it for a minute, and then seeing the small wastebasket beneath it, he emptied the ashtray and quickly set it on the table. His fingers left deep marks in the cigarette where he put it down. Is this your room? He asked. No, answered the vampire. Just a room. What happened then? The boy asked. The vampire appeared to be watching the smoke gather beneath the overhead bulb. We went back to New Orleans post-haste, he said. Lestat had his coffin in a miserable room near the ramparts. And did you get into the coffin? I had no choice. I begged Lestat to let me stay in the closet, but he laughed, astonished. Don't you know what you are? He asked. But is it magical? Must it have this shape? I pleaded. Only to hear him laugh again. I couldn't bear the idea, but we all argued. I realized I had no real fear. It was a strange realization. All my life I feared closed places, worn bred in French houses with lofty ceilings and floor-length windows. I had a dread of being enclosed. I felt uncomfortable, even confessional in the church. It was a normal enough fear. And now I realized as I processed the Lestat, I did not actually feel this anymore. I was simply remembering it. Hanging on to it from habit, from a deficiency of ability to recognize my present and exhilarating freedom. You're carrying on badly, Lestat said finally, and it's almost dawn. I should let you die. You will die, you know. The sun will destroy the blood I've given you, in every tissue and every vein. But you shouldn't be feeling this fear at all. I think you're a man who loses an arm or leg and keeps insisting that he can feel pain when the arm or leg used to be. Well, that was possibly the most intelligent, useful thing Lestat ever said in my presence, and it brought me around at once. Now I'm getting into the coffin, he finally said to me in a most disdainful tone, and you will get in on top of me if you know what's good for you. And I did. I lay face down on him, utterly confused by my absence of dread and filled with a distaste for being so close to him, handsome and intriguing though he was. And he shut the lid. Then I asked him if I was completely dead. My body was tingling and itching all over. No, you're not then, he said. When you are, you'll only hear and see it changing and feel nothing. You should be dead by tonight. Go to sleep. Was he right? Were you dead when you woke up? Yes, I changed, I should say. As obviously I am alive, my body was dead. It was some time before I was absolutely cleaned of the fluids and matter it no longer needed, but it was dead. And with the realization of it came another state in my divorce from human emotions. The first thing which became apparent to me, even though while Lestat and I were loading the coffin in a hearse and stealing another coffin from a mortuary, was that I did not like Lestat at all. I was far from being his equal yet, but I was infinitely closer to him than I had been before the death of my body. I can't make this clear to you from the obvious reason that you now, as I was before my body died. You cannot understand, but before I died, Lestat was absolutely the most overwhelming experience I've ever had. Your cigarette has become one long cylindrical ash. Oh! The boy quickly ground the filter into the glass. You mean that when the gap was closed between you, he lost his spell? He asked. His eyes quickly fixed on the vampire, his hands now producing a cigarette and matched much more easily than before. Yes, that's correct, said the vampire with obvious pleasure. The trip back to Pointe du Loc was thrilling, and the constant chatter of Lestat was positively the most boring and disheartening thing I ever experienced. Of course, as I said, I was far from being his equal. I had my dead limbs to contend with, to use to comparison. I learned that on my very first night when I tried to make my first kill. The vampire reached across the table now and gently brushed the ash from the boy's lapel, and the boy stared at him, withdrawing his hand in alarm. Excuse me, said the vampire. I didn't mean to frighten you. Excuse me, said the boy. I just got the impression that your arm was abnormally long. You reached so far without moving. No, said the vampire, resting his hands again on his crossed knees. I moved forward much too fast for you to see. It was an illusion. You moved forward, but you didn't. You were sitting just as you are now, with your back against the chair. No, repeated the vampire firmly. I moved forward, as I told you. Here, I do it again. And he did it again. The boy stared with the same mixture of confusion and fear. You still didn't see it, said the vampire. But, you see, if you look at my outstretched arm now, it's really not remarkably long at all. When we raised his arm, first finger pointed heavenward, as if he was giving an angel to give as if he were an angel about to give the word of the Lord, you have experienced a fundamental difference between the way you see and I see. My gesture appears slow and somewhat languid to me, and the sound of my finger brushing your coat was quite audible. Well, I didn't mean to frighten you, I confess, but perhaps you can see from this that my Pointe du Loc was a feast of new experiences, the mere swaying of a tree branch in the wind, a delight. I will continue on the next part later.